Hello, everyone. My name is Eddie Bolen. I'm a pastor at Midway United Methodist Church. I'm also a pastor at Edgewater United Methodist Church. I want to thank you so much for taking some time and for watching this video. As we begin, I want to start with some rather troubling numbers that are just beginning to emerge about some of the things that people are experiencing right now. Particularly, I will say, was a survey that was conducted in America. So particularly some of the things that Americans are kind of going through right now, kind of feeling right now, some of the things that are happening that they're dealing with in their day-to-day lives. There was a Stress in America poll that was conducted in February 2022. So just think about that we're at a place where there is a stress, the level of stress that Americans are feeling, that pollsters are conducting that. So this is one that was done just really quite recently when I'm making this video. It's in February 2022. And some of the biggest concerns that people had, some of the biggest concerns that came out of that Stress in America poll is the rising cost of food, energy, and other everyday items due to inflation. That's 87% of people said that they were troubled by that causes them stress. 81% of people said that there are supply chain issues, and that is causing people stress. Global uncertainty, again, 81% of people responded and said, that's one thing that's causing stress. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, 80% said that is something that is causing me stress. Potential Russian cyber attacks or nuclear threats, that was also 80%. So imagine that 80% of people that responded, they said that's a concern that they have. In addition to those worries that were cited by thousands of adults who participated in the American Psychological Association Stress in America poll, 63% of people said their lives have been forever changed by COVID-19. Now, the sources that I use for this come from U.S. News and World Report. This is posted online March 11th, 2022. So that's the source. And if you'd like to have that, whole article, I'll be glad to email it to you. Just send a private message. How you're watching this video, send a message to one of the churches, either Edgewater or Midway. I'll be glad to send that out to you. But again, this kind of troubling experience that we're having, I was really surprised for me, for one, to see that, where people are saying that it feels like, my life's been forever changed since COVID-19 and just the kind of place that we're in. There's a time and a place in the Gospel of John. It's one of those things that's really is really so valuable. I can give you chapter and verse. I can cite chapter and verse for that. But in John chapter 12, it's a New Testament book in the Bible. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John tell us the story about Jesus. John is one of those. And in John chapter 12, that is the 12th chapter. And then if you go into the 12th chapter, if you move down and notice all the verses, the 27th verse, this is what Jesus says about his own life. He says, "Now my soul is deeply troubled." And I don't know where those words hit you or what they're saying to you, but based on what a lot of people say when a pollster asks them, there's a lot of people right now that say, what? My soul is also deeply troubled. I'm experiencing moments of stress. I'm experiencing moments of anxiety. And then there's just a litany of other things that many people are going through. But when I hear those words of Jesus that says, "My soul is deeply troubled," again, John chapter 12, verse 27, I know for me, there's a couple of things that stirs up. And one of those things that stirs up a lot of curiosity, but it also is a hopeful saying. It stirs up some hope in my own life. For one thing, the hope that it stirs up in my life, because I hear those words of Jesus and I read those words of Jesus and I think this about myself. I say, well, if Jesus experienced a troubled soul, there's a great deal of hope in my own life. There's a great deal of hope for me. I know what it feels like to have a troubled soul. I know what it feels like to experience some of the stress that was listed in that study done by the American Psychological Association. But then there's this curiosity that emerges about Jesus. My soul is deeply troubled in me. And I begin to wonder, what is happening in Jesus' life? What's going on in Jesus' life? So that Jesus would voice that, so he would give voice to that kind of feeling that he's experiencing deeply in his soul. Now, luckily for us, is that this verse doesn't stand by itself. It is not John chapter 12, 27, and then it completely ends. There's a 28, there's a 29, there's a 30. There's verses that continue on there. And I encourage you to do that, to take a look when you have an opportunity. If you can do that, if you can do a little bit better than I'll be able to. But if you can navigate two screens, or if you've got your phone, if you're watching on your computer or your tablet, if you've got your phone to do this, take a look at John chapter 12. Now, primarily for me, what I've been using is a translation of the Bible. It's called the New Revised Standard Version, the NRSV. But look at your own favorite translation and look at those words at John chapter 12, verse 27, where Jesus says, "My soul is deeply troubled." Because the kind of curiosity that maybe not only me is having, but the kind of curiosity that it's stirring up in you, it can be answered in those next few verses. Because luckily we get to see the rest of the context that's happening, because as John leads us to consider Jesus and his own troubled soul, we see that Jesus is in fact looking where many of us begin looking around early spring, because Jesus is looking toward Easter. He's looking toward that Easter Sunday morning. And for Jesus, it's not just baskets and eggs that he sees. This is just, and just like for many of us right now, Easter's not all chocolate, and it's not all cuddly bunnies, nor is it baby chicks. But for Jesus, to look toward Easter and to get to that Easter Sunday, to get to that moment of Easter Sunday, meant that what Jesus was going to do is that Jesus was going to face the kind of death that was most despised, hanging on a cross on Good Friday, or traditionally, the way that it has been written, is that Jesus would hang on a tree in the most despised way of being executed. Now, to imagine being crucified and to die is enough to trouble anyone's soul. In fact, death and dying bothers every single one of us. It was the comedian Jerry Seinfeld who reminds us of one of the things that's just kind of unique about the scale of most stressful events that we experience in our lives. Yeah, there is a psychological scale that says these are the most stressful events that you can have in your life. And again, the comedian Jerry Seinfeld says it like this. He says, according to most studies, and that is those studies on the scale of stress, people's number one fear is the fear of public speaking. Number two is death. And again, as a comedian frames it, he says this: death is number two. Does that sound right? This means that the average person, that if you go to a funeral, that you're better off in the casket than doing the eulogy. And I can tell you, I can say hopefully that public speaking and the fear that comes with public speaking is one that I had. It's one of those changes that God made in my life, and I promise you that you can overcome that fear, just like many fears that all of us have. But Jesus will say this. Jesus will say, "My own soul is deeply troubled," and then Jesus will continue that. See, that's why I said it's not just that one verse, but Jesus continues this thought, and then Jesus asks that question. He says, "And what should I say? Father, save me from this hour." Because it is something that Jesus had the opportunity to. And when Jesus is looking and saying, "Father, save me from the hour," the one that he calls Father, the one that he thinks about as his Father, is God. Now, God is the Father of Jesus, as God is the Father of all of us who have been created in this earth. But Jesus over and over will talk about God as his Father. It says, what should I say in this moment of having a deeply troubled soul? Father, save me from this hour. We're learning a little bit more about Jesus' troubled soul as you go into John chapter 12, verse 27 and 28. He continues speaking. "No, it is for this reason that I've come to this hour. Father, glorify your name." And one thing that I want you to notice, and that's why I want to encourage you to take a moment and to look at this story yourself, is that one thing that I want you to notice is that when our souls are deeply troubled, that we have an opportunity to gain a bigger perspective. It's not only for Jesus, not only for me, but it's true for you. It's how we are wired. It's the way that God has created us and shaped us and molded us, no matter where we are, no matter what we are enduring, that when we are in a moment when our souls are deeply troubled, we have an opportunity to gain a bigger perspective. Now, I want to caution you. I do want to say this. I want to caution you and say that this is not always easy, and it is rarely the default position that many of us will take. It is not my default position, and it's rarely the default position that many of us will take. For it to become the default position in our lives, it will mean conforming our lives to the very life of Jesus. Now, you may hear that word conforming and think about confirmation. You may hear that word of conforming our lives to Jesus and think, oh, spiritual confirmation. Yeah, that's something that happens around 5th grade, happens around 6th grade. It happens for people who are a lot younger than I am. And it's something that maybe you have had in your life. It may be something that you've experienced, a time of spiritual confirmation, a time when you were able to be active in a church, a faith community, something that you were able to do online, virtually, something that you were able to do in person, where you experienced this kind of confirmation and you made that decision and said, God, I want you to be conformed in my life. I want you to be formed in my life. Now, I want to say one thing, that although the church does do this, although the church and communities of faith offer spiritual confirmation, and oftentimes it will be for 5th graders, it will be for 6th graders, the underlying part of spiritual confirmation is it's not something that we do just one time and then we're completely done. To have Jesus Christ spiritually conformed in our lives is an ongoing process. And if you notice Jesus in this very moment, and if you pay attention to the steps that Jesus begins to take, I think we can learn a great deal from this. Because if you slow down a little bit and look at Jesus' words, particularly in John chapter 12, verse 27, 28, and 29, Jesus will say, my soul is deeply troubled in this moment. What should I say? He raises the question, voices the question out loud. What should I say? Should I say, Father, save me from this hour? Now, Jesus will not only say in this particular moment, but Jesus will say in other places too, he will talk about his hour. He will talk about moments and times when his disciples maybe don't understand what he's doing or what Jesus is saying. And he will say that my hour has come. Or he will say, on the other hand, my hour has not come. You see, Jesus has this perspective of saying, this is why I'm here. And when he begins to look toward Easter Sunday, when he begins to look toward his own death, Jesus will say, I must go forward into this hour. My hour is here. My hour is coming. You see, one of the things that we immediately begin to learn from Jesus as he describes his own hour, as he describes his own reference on this earth, is that Jesus is rooted and grounded in his particular time. Jesus is rooted in the particular environments that he finds himself in. Think about all those times that Jesus will invite his disciples to consider the lilies. As Matthew chapter 6 reminds us. Or to consider the birds of the air. In other words, what Jesus will do is he will invite the disciples to notice and pay attention to things that they had not noticed and they had not paid attention. Again, Jesus will talk about when people ask him about the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God. He will talk about it's like a sower who is sowing seeds. He will talk about seeds. He will talk about dirt. He will talk about rocks. He will talk about the soil that's on the ground. You see, Jesus, wherever he finds himself in, is very much rooted in that particular time. He's very much rooted in that particular environment. And he will ask his closest followers, his disciples, his friends, he will ask them to slow down, to become aware and notice. And this is what leads us to a bigger mind. This is what leads us to a bigger perspective. Jesus owns the hour when his soul is deeply troubled. And he asks God to glorify God's own name. And before we get too far ahead, I want you to notice the pattern of Jesus' own life. Again, my soul is deeply troubled. Should I ask God to save me from this moment? Don't save me. This is why I'm here. God, glorify your name. And this is what it means to live and to grow as a follower of Jesus Christ. That in a moment when our souls are troubled, to embrace the hour that you find yourself in with a troubled soul. And to recognize that there is a bigger perspective than just your troubled soul, and begin to see that in this hour I am here, and God has a plan, and God also has an opportunity for me in this very hour with this troubled soul. Now again, this is very easy to talk about, but it's much harder to actually experience. And this is where the Apostle Paul is extraordinarily helpful. Because the Apostle Paul, in writing a letter, this is again a New Testament letter, a letter to the Galatians, in the midst of their own troubled souls. Now this will be after the resurrection. This will be after Easter, so this is later. This is a second generation that is coming. The Apostle Paul, in his own encounter with Jesus, this is a second generation that is emerging as followers of Jesus Christ. And so the Apostle Paul will write to them and he'll say, "My little children, for whom I am again in the pain of childbirth until Christ is formed in you, I wish I were present and could change my tone, for I am perplexed about you." That's Galatians chapter 4, verse 19 through 20. Now, to change his tone, Paul has began this letter. In fact, in Galatians chapter 3, verse 1, you can see why Paul is wishing to change his tone. Because in Galatians chapter 3, verse 1, he says, "You foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you?" You foolish Galatians. I mean, how do you do that? How do you come back from calling a whole group of people, a whole community, and calling them foolish? Calling someone foolish, you probably want to come back. You probably want to circle back, and you want to soften that tone just a little bit. Yet from this harsh tone, what we discover, something essential about growing as a follower of Jesus, is that growth doesn't come automatically. And this is what the Apostle Paul is reminding the Galatians, that this kind of growth, it does not come automatically. Growth is painful, and it's ongoing. In Paul's words, until Christ is formed in you. You see, Paul looks at the Galatians, and as upset as he might be, as angry as he might be, calling them foolish, he recognizes that their kind of growth, their kind of formation in Jesus Christ, they're becoming more and more like Jesus Christ in their own lives, that it is something that is formed in them. But Paul also recognizes something that is just essential for the place that all of us find ourselves in at times, is that it can be from that kind of deep pain and a troubled soul that can lead us to a transformative moment when Christ is formed more deeply in our lives. And see, this is what made the Apostle Paul want to change his tone from Galatians chapter 3 to Galatians chapter 4, and will say to the whole community, "My little children, for whom I am again in the pain of childbirth until Christ is formed in you." There's an opportunity to experience a transformative moment in their lives where Jesus Christ is formed more deeply, and Jesus begins to conform their lives in a much more essential way. Christ being formed in our lives is the goal that every single one of us share, whether our souls are deeply troubled or not. No matter what shape our souls may be in right now, as Jesus shows us, and as the Apostle Paul recognizes, in moments of deep pain, we can experience significant transformation, significant spiritual formation in our lives, and become more like Jesus. You see, we can be spiritually transformed in moments of deep pain. Essential is being able to recognize that this is the hour, like Jesus says, that this is my hour for spiritual transformation. This is my hour for Jesus to become more deeply formed in my life. Or, as the Apostle Paul said, I've already introduced it. But as the Apostle Paul says, this is a moment, this deeply painful moment, this moment of your own foolishness, or the foolishness of some of the events that are directly impacting your life and causing you some deep pain and some deep stress right now, that these can be moments of spiritual transformation. A time that when we can open ourselves up to the presence of Jesus and say, as Jesus does, "Father, in this moment of deep trouble in my soul, Father, glorify your name." Notice in a voice from heaven, again, as you read John 12:28, notice in a voice from heaven what God says, "I have glorified it, and I will glorify it again." About God's glory, about God's name. I've glorified it, and I will glorify it again. You see, that's the truth that we have from this particular section of Scripture. That is what we recognize in a deeply troubled soul, is that God is eager to glorify God's name in your deeply troubled soul. And for many of us, it really is in deep pain that we are the most open and even longing to have God's glory revealed in our own lives. Just think about your pain that you may be experiencing right now. Are you in a place where you're open, maybe even more open than you have been in other times, to have Christ formed more fully in your life? Just imagine that in what is for many of us, according to recent polls, deeply troubling times. Imagine that these are times for God's glory to be revealed in our lives and for Jesus to be more deeply formed in our lives as well. You know, as the patriot, Thomas Paine, who on the verge of a brand new nation, a brand new American nation being birthed, being formed, who said, "These are the times that try men's souls." It was a pamphlet that was entitled "The American Crisis." These are the times that try men's souls. May the times that try and deeply trouble all of our souls, may those be times in which God is glorified and Christ is formed more deeply in our lives. Well, I thank you for taking some time and for watching this video. I pray that you will open yourself up, that no matter where you find yourself at, no matter where you find yourself spiritually at right now, no matter where your soul is in this moment, I pray that it will be a moment and a time when you open yourself up and let Christ be formed more deeply in your own life. May God's blessings and may God's spiritual transformation be with all of you, both now and forevermore. Amen.